Hello again here at Exploratorium. Thanks for coming for this wonderful film. What a present to humanity. We're here for Improvisions number 1, Step Across the Border, tonight. And now I would like you to welcome again Nicolas Humbert and also Fred Frith, of course. So Improvisions is a new series here dealing with the interrelation of improvisation and film. And this is leading to a symposium beginning of next year with the title Filming Improvisation, Improvising with Film. There are a few more events coming up in the next time with film and improvisation also to prepare this. And I'm really extremely happy that it was possible to start the series with exactly this film, since for sure it can be regarded as the iconic improvisation film, I would say. And also personally for me, when I saw the film first, this was also a kind of initial experience that finally got me into the world of free improvisation.
My sympathies.
Pardon?
My sympathies, I said.
Yeah. The film was shot in the late 80s. It came out in 1990. It received a lot of prizes and a lot of acknowledgement at the time. Yes. And most important to mention in the beginning is it was the cooperation of 2 filmmakers. So it was not only Nicolas Humbert's film, but it was made together with Werner Penzel.
Exactly. Important.
This is where I would like to start, maybe, Nicolas. It's very particular to have 2 filmmakers working on one film. Could you maybe tell us something about the history with Werner and how you came up with the idea to realize such a project?
Yes, of course. I mean, the beginning was really, I mean, the spirit of this film is a spirit of friendship. I think a friendship between Werner and me, and then as a trio together with Fred and all the other musicians that appeared in the movie. Like that? Yeah, okay. Werner and me met in Munich, and we became friends, and we thought that it would be interesting to make a film without a hierarchy of normally that's always one director at the end, but to create a film out of our friendship, the spirit of our friendship. And for a while we thought, what could be the film that we can make together? And we found out that Werner, as well as me, had used music of Fred already. We were very much, you didn't know then, yeah, in movies that we have done before. In Wolfsgrub, for example, the film that I had made about my mother, music of Fred appears already, and for Werner it was the same. And both of us, we were very much into music. We were also playing together, making sessions together. So music, and especially improvised music, was an important element of our life. So one evening that I remember very well, we were sitting in a bar on the airport in Barcelona on the way to Cuba, because we wanted to visit the new film school in Havana. And we were just hanging around in this airport bar and just playing around with ideas. What could be our flying carpet as a topic for this movie? And then all of a sudden, Fred appeared at this bar. Yeah, you don't remember that, no? But it was like
you're lying. What?
No. So just as an idea, you know. Yeah. You appeared.
Okay.
Basically, it was an apparition. And after coming back home from Cuba, we discovered a poster in Munich announcing a concert of Fred in Munich, solo guitar solo on the guitar on the table. Yeah.
Okay.
In a famous place in Munich called Loft, and we went there. It was 2 weeks after our idea, and we dared to approach Fred after the concert, yeah, and invited him for a plate of spaghetti at our house. And Fred was hungry enough to accept this offer.
This whole film came about because of spaghetti.
Yes,
I mean, come on.
so simple are the things. And then we suggested this film. You know, this was the very beginning of Step Across the Border.
And Fred, there was a really important premise in the beginning that you accepted the invitation. You understood that they were not into making a documentation about you. So what was it? What interested you in the project that they proposed to you?
I'm not a big fan of documentaries about musicians because there's only a limited amount of time you can spend looking at somebody looking artistic and playing the piano. Or they seem to be fundamentally fairly boring. The music to listen to is nice, but the actual portrayal wasn't very interesting, and I wasn't interested in being the subject of such a documentary. And said so.
Right.
And
Right.
they countered by effectively saying that what they were really interested in was not really me. They were interested in what it would mean to improvise from the context of making a movie.
Yeah.
How you would make a movie. Because normally if you're making a film, setting up a shot can take hours, and it usually involves more than one person. And so the idea that a very small mobile group could set up a shot in minutes and react to something spontaneously in the places where they happen to be following me around was quite exciting to me. The idea of that there was no plan about what they were going to shoot. They were just going around. I mean, the first shooting, I happened to be going to Japan, and they got some funding, a little bit of funding to come to Japan. And so they were filming, as you can see in the film, lots of stuff in Japan, not just bits of me, but all kinds of things. And that was kind of where the film was started, and came back and made a cut and showed it to people and raised a little bit more money. So the whole thing about, shoestring budget and carrying on. It was a very good lesson for me to see how this thing could actually work, because there was no budget, there was no plan, there was no anything. We were just winging it the whole time, and as a result, there's a kind of freshness to the approach that I was very excited by.
Yeah, I can imagine. So it was really incredible that it was possible to make it at all with not really a budget from the beginning on.
Yeah. And as Fred said, I remember very well, your first reaction was, I'm not at all interested in a portrait. Yeah. And this was exactly what we didn't want to do. So it was, and then 3 months later, we got this letter from you, handwritten letter that is still in our collection, inviting us to Japan, because you suggested that's a good moment to start this movie, and we had no budget, and Japan as the most expensive country that you can imagine, and thanks God we found somebody who was organizing this whole trip, Peter Zobel, and was our good angel and leading us through Japan. And from the beginning, as you say, it was clear that we were not only hanging around with you, but just
Thank God for that.
Yeah, no, this would have been too much. Just exploring things,
Yeah.
And so we were collecting material, and that started already during the first shooting in Japan. For example, this whole sequence with percussion. This was we had kind of chapters or headlines, and percussion, as Fred, the element of percussion is very important for your playing, we thought too, always. So we were collecting material around the topic of percussion, and so this long sequence at the end, for example, is constructed mostly from the material that we've shot in Japan then, and in New York. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's the famous drum manufacturing,
in the subway station. And all that kind of the details. If you start collecting things without knowing exactly where it would lead to, but just collecting,
So you said already that the beginning was in Japan, and later, of course, a lot of stuff was filmed in New York, but also in Europe.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of traveling around,
Yeah.
and this brings me to the question: You have founded your company together with Werner called Cine Nomad.
It was kind of the program, you know.
So that
cinema and being on the road.
Yeah. So this is very fitting in telling this name, and so you had it, of course, in this film, following the trail of Fred somehow, and also in Middle of the Moment, another film you made later together with Werner. And Fred as a musician, of course. I met with Werner as a director, and with Fred as a composer for the film music. Exactly. I didn't want to forget you.
No. I'm aware of that.
There you are following Tuareg nomads and a circus and so on, and also in the film of Werner in Vagabundenkarawane, for example, that was a film about embryo, and he traveled with them to Afghanistan, I think. So this nomadic concept, so that's the content, but also the methodology in a way that you've been using. Can you outline this a little bit?
Well, I mean, as an artist, maybe you discover the elements that are the most important elements that you can feel inside of you, even in admiring maybe other directors or musicians or composers, all kind of artists. But at the end, you just have to find out what is your inner structure and your elements that may create the base for your creations. And living a nomadic life and working for the cinema, because that's the space. Yeah, we were always working for the screen in a way, was clear between us, and we were very lucky that Werner and me had the same kind of attraction for these elements, and that allowed us also this long friendship and collaboration that we had, almost 17 years, with all the things we did after Step Across the Border. So it was a form of intuition or discovery, what is really drawing you towards something. And then, of course, in meeting Fred and the whole circle of these wonderful musicians around him, it was the same concept of life. Yeah? And that maybe makes the unity of this film also. Yeah.
So you were mentioning the film about your mother and also about your family history, Wolfsgrub, already.
Yeah.
And what I found really remarkable in the film is that you kind of developed your aesthetic language already to a very great extent, and you find a lot of elements also in Step Across the Border later. So, for example, most obviously maybe the choice of the black and white film, but then also the way you are displaying nature, this kind of observing view on it, the long shots, also the steady camera and so on. And then you also have these moments of the music of everyday activity. So the sky thing of a meadow, for example, it's pretty much
that's nice that you
the same already, which you have been continuing in Step Across the Border to a greater extent than.
I never thought about that. That's nice always to have these kind of conversations and exchange, because as an artist, basically you act very innocently, and then all of a sudden you get some keys for what you have done, and that's nice. I like that.
I thought it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, nice. I never thought about that. That Wolfsgrub, because Wolfsgrub is very concentrated, and good.
Yeah. In how far do these aesthetic choices also match with your art as an improviser, Fred? So where do you see the connection of how they are approaching film and how you are approaching? Well, I'm saying music, but you.
I was learning. I mean, obviously I'd never been filmed before, and so seeing the film later now, I can see how self-conscious I was and how I felt like I had to say something important, and so there's the whole element of myself that I resist when I see myself on the screen, and at the same time there are other things that I enjoy, but from the improvisation point of view, I think we discussed at the time, it's kind of an interesting contradiction, Because I'm getting up and improvising, although there's a lot of actual composed music in the film, so it's not all improvised by any means in the film.
No.
And at the same time, the idea that the film is improvised is, on one level at least, a nonsense. Because the actual process of gathering material was extremely improvisational. I mean, stunningly quick, wonderful material as a result of that. But then you spend 6 months in a cutting studio composing it and recomposing it and recomposing it. And that's not improvised in the same sense at all. That's a very deep compositional process. So it's a film about improvisation, which has an improvisational element, and it's also something else. It's a kind of a profound composition. Yeah. And I find, I mean, we can argue about what's what, but it's not that important. But I find that the contradictions are interesting from that point of view.
It's maybe comparable also to when you go to a studio, a music studio, with material that you have pre-recorded, no? Because I always had the feeling it's improvised. It's as you describe, it's improvised during the shooting. The shooting was always, also with Middle of the Moment, all the films that we did was a kind of an improvised shooting, and then the part of composing or trying to find the film in the material. That's basically it, to find the film in the material, and that takes time. So it was almost a year also, the editing of Step Across the Border, also Middle of the Moment, because it's not obvious to create a narration over a period of time of almost 90 minutes. You have also find a form of a form that contains, that brings you from one point to the other without having a script, without having logical structures, but just inventing the elements that can bring you from image to image. And sometimes, or often, it's also the sound. That sound creates the next image or the next phase, the next chapter. And this is a long process, And you don't know, for example, the last sequence with the dancing old couple. We tried very hard, there's a first version of the film where this dancing couple appears very early in the film. And it had never this magic, even with a different music, and we were very disappointed because we thought that's so essential. This scene is so essential for the film. The whole spirit is condensed in this scene. And then we tried another second phase of editing. It appeared in the middle, also not with this music. And then all of a sudden, we decided, we found. Too much power, too little heart, or too much power, too little brains. And as a message for the end, even if it's a kind of a clin d'œil, we've put it on the end, at the end of the movie, and all of a sudden, together with this with this music, and all of a sudden, the whole magic of this scene was there, but it took a long time to find it. So that explains this long period of composing a film in the editing room.
But I mean, I've worked on a lot of films, and that seems to be the way it works. And I've learned. I mean, I'm very influenced from working with Werner and Nico, obviously, but also with other directors. I've copied a lot of techniques from seeing how people edit films. There's usually a wall full of little bits of paper, which is very useful. So I often have, if I'm trying to create something, I often have the pieces of paper which I can then move around until you find a combination which works. So ways of working with image have translated themselves into ways that I work with sound, and that's been quite interesting. And I think that the recording studio, in any case, especially in the history of pop music, has been deeply influenced by film. Obviously, the Beatles is a classic example of how film world works its way into pop world because the hierarchy of sound is completely undermined in recording. So you can have a tambourine be much louder than a whole symphony orchestra if you want. There's no longer any of that. You can juxtapose things in that way, and cinema created that. I mean, you know, the composers. What's his name? Rahul Dev Brahman, the Indian music composer. He was one of the first to actually put instruments that don't usually fit together into a film, and that's been very interesting for me to think about from the point of view of putting music together. And there are certain, I mean, there's a piece that Henry Cow did in 1974, which was very influenced by film, because there was one moment on it where there's a bit of a song on a piano, and we kept it the way it was, which was that the piano wasn't in tune, there wasn't a microphone anywhere near it, and so there's suddenly the sound of a space. You're suddenly in a different space. You're moving in space in order to find that piano sound and that voice sound, and that becomes cinematic. You're like you're following a camera when you listen to it, and those kind of techniques in the studio interest me a lot.
To create the space, different space.
Yeah, it's true that this is the way to go, but I really found the way of the editing extremely sophisticated, the way you manage to combine things, so not only pictures but also how you combine sounds and so on. There are really a lot of elements that are really astonishing, I think, the way that you combine them and how you set them together.
Yeah, and to understand the right place. For example, the opening with Jonas Mekas, with this butterfly wing theory, which was part of a sequence that was completely differently thought. And to understand that he gave us the whole method, the principle of the editing for this movie. So opening with Jonas, understanding, that it was far beyond our intention, what we thought he will give us, for the film. He gave us something different. And to understand that, and then to understand that this has to be the beginning of or relatively at the beginning of the film, to make clear now we follow this butterfly wing theory as a method of editing this film. Things like that, And this you don't know from the beginning. You just have to digest, and you have to understand what's the meaning of something that you have done.
Yeah, and you also have to find it. So there's not so much talking in the film, and Fred, you already said you were trying to say something meaningful and so on, but it also worked, I think, because there's not so much talk in the film. The things that are being said are becoming even more important. Yeah. And now, where you were mentioning the beginning of Jonas Mekas, I found that it's a really interesting bracket that you are starting with Jonas Mekas and the butterfly wing theory, but then rather to the end, you have Robert Frank in the train, and talking about being in the present and talking about movement, and he even says
getting older,
about getting older, and he also says sorry about the movement, it's all symbolic. So you have this bracket between those two important avant-garde film figures. So I'm interested, first of all, how did you meet them, and how did you work with their I mean, you have started to answer the question already, because you put Jonas Mekas in the beginning and Robert Frank in the end. Yeah. But that was quite witty idea to structure this film,
but it took some time, and all started. That's really a long story, but I can try to condense it. The working title of this movie was "Sound of One Hand," and we thought that we try to structure the film. This was thought before, and you always have to correct yourself, in a way. We thought that this story of one hand clapping, I don't know whether you know that. The story is a Zen story about what's the sound of one hand clapping. It's a very famous one, and we thought that this story will structure the movie. So we decided to record this story with various persons on the road to build up the story in fragments through the film. Then, during the process of editing, we found out very fast, very quick in a way, that it's much too much concept, you know, and in a kind of a strict form that will never leave the freedom just to jump from one scene to the other. And so we gave up this idea of telling the story of one hand clapping. But we had wonderful material that we have shot for that. So Mekas was one, and he decided not to tell the story of the one-hand clapping, but his own story, the butterfly wing theory. And the other person, Robert Frank, also refused to tell the story because the two masters found completely stupid and not very interesting to repeat a story that was already there, you know. So they had to give us something else, and they decided to give us something. So Mekas was giving us the butterfly wing theory, and Frank at the end this kind of approach, philosophical approach to life and movement and trains and the long sequence of trains, and he is in that. So we kept these two, the two masters, and they became brackets of the film. The rest we redefined, and it became that collage of all these people talking together, and we called it language as music, music as language. And we redefined it, so you can't understand really the story, but you have this composition that is completely made out of voices, and including Joey Barron, who is laughing all the time, because as for the Sense story, it was ideal that
he does.
That's what he does. It's one of his performances, of course. So we had to redefine and to correct, and that's great. I mean, that's what I like very much in the improvisation process, and you certainly too, that you are always challenged by changing ideas that you created, and you think, oh, this could work, you know, and then to say, no, we have to get rid of it and to reinvent the whole thing. And that's the story of Sound of One Hand, or the two masters. That's what you. Why Mekas and why Frank? Of course, I mean, we were very close and very attracted by their work, you know. So we dared to approach Mekas and Frank in New York, and they accepted us as young filmmakers and gave us something that were two keys for constructing the movie. Beautiful.
Yeah, and then you still have the Zazen the koan in the middle of the sound of the one hand clapping.
Yeah.
In that way, I thought that it's also maybe a reference to the shooting in Japan.
Yeah,
you also have the Zen garden, which is
it was Japan, and it was the idea. Okay, it's a beautiful title, Sound of One Hand. That's the other. That's the other part of why we didn't use it. That Fred, we stayed with this title till the very end, and then you came and said, "Sound of One Hand." It's not a good title, you know. It's not the real title for this movie. I remember very well, and that it was just before finishing, you know. And you lived and you worked for years with a title, you know. And then Fred came in and said, "No, that's not the right title." So, okay, once again to be corrected, because Fred felt that you expressed it. I'm not a Zen master. That's what you said, you know. I'm not a Zen master. I'm far from that. So, of course, we had to change the title, but it was a deep crisis, because you are so used to a working title until the very end, and then we sat in the kitchen and said, what could be the right title? And then we found out, but by chance, that on a Skeleton Crew album, there's a beautiful song, One Step Across the Border. And we thought, step across the border.
1 foot after another.
1 foot after another. Right, exactly. And this was then when we suggested to Fred this new title, and it was just the right title for it. So it's great to be always, in a way, in this kind of exchange. I like very much. Also with Werner, it's a different way to be alone or in a process with others, to reflect on the open form. If you work in this free space where nothing is really defined, this exchange between artists is very, very fruitful and helps a lot. I was always interested in that, basically, these collaborations. Mm.
I was still wondering if the practice of Zen might have anything to do with improvisation. We've been talking about the process of getting empty before a performance before, and I can remember that was an issue for you.
An issue?
So, yeah, you talked about your practice of Tai Chi for some time, and then you discovered that it's also possible to read a newspaper before the concert.
or smoke a cigarette.
The principle for me was the idea that as an improviser, it's important to avoid thinking about anything before you actually start playing. And since I was practicing Tai Chi in the early 80s, that turned out to be a very good way to empty myself of any idea about what I was going to do. As time went by, I discovered that talking about a football game or reading the newspaper or doing something completely unrelated and then going straight on stage from that worked just about as well. And it's less physically exertion, you know. So. But I think that the idea that when you start, you have a blank slate so that you really don't know what you're going to do is kind of important. And the first gesture that you make as an improviser can be anything. And I've concluded that it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all what you do. You just do something. And then once you've done it, it leads you where you want to go, or you lead it to where you want it to go, or however you want to frame that. But as soon as you start applying, I'm going to start with this and start with that, you end up trapping yourself, imprisoning yourself. And I remember my very first concerts as an improviser, which were catastrophic in many ways. And I realized that the reason they were catastrophic was because I had a plan. You know, I would say, oh, that bit's good, that's impressive, I'm going to do that. And this works really well as an ending, and I should definitely do this and this because they're pretty cool. And so I would have an outline of things that I was going to do, and the music was dead in the water. They'd never had a chance to go anywhere because I was busy with my plan. So the first thing you do is get rid of the plan. And reading the newspaper is one way to do it.
Here we go again with the relation to direct cinema.
Well, as a musician, you start always performing musicians from zero. As a filmmaker, you have never this freedom. I mean, in shooting maybe because you decide this or that angle or frame or moment, you know. But you are always confronted with much more material that is already there. So this kind of freedom I admired always in making music, you know. This blank.
But in the shooting of Step Across, you did manage to get really quick at how you would respond to something. I mean, for me, it was eternally impressive. Just you would notice something, and before you knew it, it was already being filmed. And that's so unlike the world of film. That's not how film works. So that was very impressive.
Yeah, and in this way, I think it is connected also with this blank situation for starting an improvisation that that you have both elements, you know, for shooting this way. You have to be very fast, very quick, following your intuition that something almost before, a moment before, that you are aware of something could happen. And then long periods of time where you are just waiting and not touching the camera. Yeah, and that's a contradiction, you would think, you know, to be fully aware of the moment and prepared for the moment, and then the long phases where you just see nothing happening, but you have to stand it. You have to be in the same kind of concentration and awareness and disposition for the moment as you before starting an improvisation.
You should have come and talked to the workshop today. Okay. Because I think that if you're in a large group improvisation, you have to get used to the idea that you're not going to be doing very much. and of course everybody wants to be doing something. So the idea that you have to wait, and nothing is happening for me right now, and it could happen, and I'm anticipating it, but I'm not going to dive in all the time because it will kill it. And so, that's a very interesting parallel to what we were talking about today.
Yeah. No, and because it's a kind of a contradiction, to be fast, that you have to be fast. Like this dancing couple, for example, we discovered them by chance. They were dancing there. It was a cold Saturday. They came back from their shopping, and then this moment you can't repeat. So even the decision as asking them, or just being there with the camera and filming, where you can easily destroy the whole situation because they feel offended by your presence. So this kind of moment, and that's a personal challenge that I like very much, because it makes you growing in a way, or being more aware or very clear with your decision, even if it's only coming from a intuitive side.
But it raises ethical questions.
Yeah.
And I know. The whole sequence in the Japanese train, the sleeping figures, I know that friends in Japan have found generally the depiction of Japan to be questionable. And at the same time, those pictures, those bits of film in the train are profound. They tell us something about how our society functions in a way that's absolutely glorious, but at the same time, you're stealing people. So there's a whole kind of, it's a very dangerous territory for a documentary filmmaker.
Absolutely. And never, and not thinkable anymore.
No, you wouldn't.
Many things. Also,
you couldn't do it now.
To move in New York with a 16mm camera equipment, without permission, and just to shoot on the street, I think this is really not possible anymore.
There were two quotations, and I found the people you were citing quite remarkable in the context of the film. So you're talking about Tarkovsky, and using a quotation about the function of art as being communication, and also Henri Cartier-Bresson about art as a practice of liberation, of freedom, and so on. So one of the most important, greatest filmmakers, and one of the really big voices in photography. That's a good fit, maybe, for the film.
This was Fred.
Nothing to do with him. It was in my bag.
This was a gift of Fred, saying, "Oh yeah,
yeah, I guess so."
That's our.
But the function of art is being communication. So, how does that relate still to your work as an improviser or as an artist?
How does it not relate? I mean, am I not communicating?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
All art is communicating. The interesting part. No, I think so.
Yeah, you think so?
And I relate strongly to the statement that it's when he says photography is a way of shouting and freeing oneself. I think I have a feeling that all art is basically saying, "I'm here, and what are you going to do about it?" And that goes back to cave paintings, to the most primitive stuff. It's a way of asserting your presence and saying, "Here I am. In spite of those tigers out there, I'm here." And in a way, that's what we're all doing. We're saying we're here. And it's a way of asserting your aliveness. It's a way of saying, I'm alive and I'm present, and this is what I have to share. And that's about as good communication as you can have. It's very direct. I'm not trying to teach you something. I'm not trying to tell you something. I'm just trying to share something, or even just open a door for you to walk into and travel together for a while. That kind of communication, that's what interests me. What do you think?
That's a great answer.
No,
That's
I
a
mean,
great answer.
you think
this is what I wanted to hear. Yeah, Nicolas, you wanted to add to that?
That's true. I mean, recently I read an interview with IYY about the function of art, of course, and he says clearly, and it's banal, but he says art has to be dialogue. If you don't have consider or art as an offer, as in your interest in the other, not in yourself. I mean, that's also the quotation. Then art is meaningless. Yeah. So art contains the aspect, and I ask myself if you quote the cave paintings, for example, as that the statement of an artist is already an offer to the other, or can it only be just that you state your presence, but contains not necessarily the offer or the interest?
Yeah, tricky. I think it contains the offer.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that unless there was somebody alone in the cave and everybody else was dead, and they were saying, okay, this is it. Ciao.
It contains always the offer, you think?
I think it's
okay.
You're showing something to somebody. Yeah,
and there's art that
you're almost asking for input. I mean, I think hearing myself talking in the film, which is kind of scary, but I think that there's a truth in the idea that when I'm on stage and I do a concert, mostly these days with other people, so there's other kinds of communication happening. I don't do that many solo concerts anymore. But there's a way in which you are presenting something and sharing something and opening that door and traveling together, and there's something very important that can come back. So having feedback afterwards from an audience, positive or negative or irrelevant, it's just the idea that somebody has understood the sharing process and is prepared to dialogue with you about it. That's very important, and I think it's critical to how I still work. I still like that. I'm not trying to show you anything, and so I like it when people come and say, "What the fuck are you doing?" Somebody else did that much better before. I've been hearing that all my life.
Does anybody in the audience have similar questions like this for Fred and for Nicolas?
So you hand it over.
Yeah, I have two questions actually. One is the bit with the taiko drummer. Was the bit with the taiko drummer, was it composed or improvised? And if it was composed, how was the process? Did you have a lot of interaction with a musician before, or how did it work?
Which bit are you talking about?
The taiko drummer.
That was completely improvised. We didn't converse because we didn't speak each other's language at all.
Wow.
It was a concert which was called 9 by 9. It was on my birthday, and the concert consisted of 9 9-minute duos, so I got to play for a rather long time continuously, but every 9 minutes somebody would leave and somebody else would arrive. And that's how the thing unfolded. And that was the 9 minutes with Eitetsu. So I had no idea what he was going to do other than that it was going to be loud.
And have you had other processes where you have composed music for musicians from non-Western cultures?
Yes.
How did that work? How did you immerse yourself in the language?
Usually it's occurred when I've had students, especially at Mills College, who came from other cultures. And so in the process of a 2-year master's degree where they're studying improvisation with me, I get to learn an awful lot. And so, for example, Wu Fei, who's a guzheng player from China, who I've worked with quite a bit, I had 2 years masterclass with her basically about what a guzheng is and how it works and how it's tuned and how it sounds and what you can do with it. And so that's how it's generally worked, is me trying to learn something about the people I'm working with. So there have been a few other examples of the same kind of thing.
Okay.
I think the answer is that you listen and learn, just like life.
And I would also be curious, my second and last question, who was the composer behind the sound design, rhythms and such in the film?
Sound of what?
The soundtrack, Step Across the
No,
Border.
sorry, I mean the sound design, like
The sound design.
Vera.
We
How-
were
how did it come?
four people in the editing room, much more than during the shooting. And it was two editors and Werner and me. So it was always a kind of a collective process. And it was clear that it was all analog times, you know. So and then till to really work hard on every detail, we were even with a Foley artist in the studio for all the small sounds that you don't hear on the original recordings. And at the very end, Fred came in once again for a very important 2 nights or 3 night session at the Bavarian television studio that I never will forget, because he was chasing around these poor engineers who never had somebody like you there. And Fred insisted really in every musical thing that had to be corrected. Yeah, including the guitar quartet.
Yeah, there's a story with the guitar quartet that's worth telling, because at the time I'd been commissioned to write a guitar quartet piece for a group from Montreal. At the time they were the only electric guitar quartet in the world, and they had asked me to write a piece for them, which I did. And we were going to premiere it at a place called The Kitchen in New York, and we applied for a visa, as one does, and about a week or 2 weeks before the show, they were denied the visa on the grounds of not being unique enough. Welcome to the US of A. And so in order to do the concert, they had to fly separately without instruments. So they came as tourists on 4 different transportation methods, and they arrived in New York. At the day of the concert, the heating system in the kitchen had broken down. It was -10. And we were going to do the concert anyway, but you can see on stage they're wearing scarves and mittens, and it was pretty damn cold. And they were playing on it, not on their own instruments, and it was the premiere, and they wanted me to conduct. It's not supposed to be conducted, and I'd never conducted it or even thought about conducting it. And I'm a lousy conductor, but hey, there I am, waving my hands around, hopefully, and the upshot was that actually the relationship between what was happening from them and what I was doing was not very precise. We were all freezing. And this was filmed. And when it came to looking at it, it was clear that there was a complete divorce between the conducting and what was... And so the thing I insisted on was that I would re-record all of the guitars, all 4 guitars, following myself as a conductor. So this is one of the things we did in this in the studio is me looking at myself conducting and trying to play in time with it, and realizing how hard it would have been for them to do the same.
So, did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there more questions or remarks? I'm sure there are.
Don't be so sure. Oh.
Well, last time you were here, they were asking you
questions.
quite some things.
You answered all these questions already, you know, so...
I don't know.
Hello.
Hi.
I would like to know if did I get that right, that there were only you and Werner for the shooting? Or were you
and a third person, a third person helping us for organizing, or also as assistant, general assistant, close friends also. One for Japan, one for New York, and in England we've been only the two of us, and France, Leipzig, all the rest. It was only the shooting in New York and the longest, and Tokyo as 3 persons. Yeah.
Okay, so you were not.
Film behind. Didn't you leave the film on a train somewhere?
I don't remember that.
No, there's an occasion when you were on your way and then someone left the film on top of a car or something. And
no, we were on the studio. I left the original recordings on top of the car in going to the studio, and we lost them. You know, even that. You know, that's part of the question for the sound design.
So you were not just the directors, but also the cameraman and all.
Well,
that. So it was a
there's a long
film.
list of titles of this film.
That's why I was asking.
So playing also with that, you know, it's I think basically maybe the spirit of this movie is playing cinema. Okay. What Godard had written to his team for the shooting of. Deux ou trois choses, je crois. We will play cinema, and that's also the titles are part of this play.
You already talked a little bit about the post-production, but can you give us a little more detail about, like, you had all this material, you had some pictures with original sound, some without, and maybe you had some composed music, or did that happen afterwards? How did you do the post-production and the music? Was the music first sometimes, or the picture, or how did that come about? Thanks.
We had the original recordings and the original material that we have shot. And beside that, we had the chance that there was this huge convolute of material of Fred's earlier recordings. So there are things in the movie, for example, the 2 songs, one Welcome to the Insects and Too Much Power, Too Little Brains, that we found on
also Same Old Me.
Same Old Me, 3 songs on earlier recordings of Fred. So we had this on top of all the original recordings that we've done during the shooting for the film. There was a rich amount of material from Fred, and he said, "Okay, you can."
Yeah, I should add that I had absolutely nothing to do with it. In other words, I did not impose any music choices or anything else. I assumed that they would do something interesting.
Yeah, it was.
And I didn't choose that material myself, or I didn't know what they were going to use. So it was kind of.
You had confidence, no? I mean, it's based on
no
that.
Fear
and confidence. But the confidence was growing then slowly, no? No, it was. So, I don't know.
So
what I can add to this question. So it's the process of composing was step by step. You know, it was not clear from the beginning, but we had the images, you know, which was a material that was limited because it was on celluloid. Fred told me today it was 13 hours, which is almost nothing now if you think of digital productions. 13 hours, you know, and at the end it's 90-minute film. So there's a relationship between the filming and used material. And we had an enormous amount of sounds, recorded music and already existing music. And we were just juggling with all this material.
Right. So my question is, like, in the editing, did you have a finished cut and then you did the sound, or was
No.
it up and down?
It was
sometimes music first, then picture. Or
I think this kind of films you can't start. Maybe a little bit similar than improvisation. You can't start from point A to build it up to point Z. You know, you have. It was all in chapters. So we decided, for example, a sequence. It was edited in sequences. So we decided, for example, a sequence with the chapter with a headline, percussion, and then we were juggling with this material that has something to do with percussion, for example. Or we had the situation of the rehearsals for Keep the Dog in New York, which was quite an amount of material that we have shot there during the rehearsals. So we tried to find out which parts of the rehearsals could lead to other sequences where we use material that was pre-recorded, like Lost and Found, for example. So it was a constant, it was all chapters, and then we tried, or sequences, and then we tried to put together certain sequences. And that's how we build up the whole narration. And there's three completely different versions of the film, which is interesting when I teach or to show it to students, because it's always much more interesting to dive into the process and to make it visible what really is behind the creation that you now see as a finished result. But before there is complete different versions of the film.
The US version is half an hour.
Commercial.
We even managed to make a 23 minutes version of this film, because we were asked from American TV to publish the film in America, but it was clear that it has to be shortened to this 23 minutes, and we accepted that challenge, you know. And there's even a 23 minutes version of Step Across the Border existing. Yeah. That's also a kind. Either you refuse such an offer, or you just say, okay, it's another play.
There's one more question.
yeah, of course, only.
Yeah, hey, thanks for showing the film. There's so many disciplines where, for me, it has like 10 out of 10. Like, say, camera, editing, sound design, original sound. But there's one thing where there's 11 out of 10 for me. That's this perspective thing that sheds this light on the whole thing. Like, I don't know, this interview you made, we spoke before about that interview, that like I know that film because I used to be a projectionist, and I projected the film like 20 times,
so you know it a little bit.
I really know it. And this is really what strikes me the most. Like, and the question would be like, did you have some kind of plan to put in that perspective? Because the perspective thing, even like you said before, it's like you're stealing images of the Japanese sleeping. For me, it's in the moment when I know that you are behind the camera, you're there. It changes anything. It changes everything. For me, you have the right. You do have the right to film, because it's your perspective on it. And the thing that changes it is that interview.
Mm-hmm.
So did you plan that interview like before? Did you have an idea that's also this improvising?
Yeah.
You know?
It's a question for me.
Rather than it's filmmaker's question.
I mean, to integrate an interview in such a film that hasn't to be a portrait is difficult. But on the other hand, it was important that Fred talks about certain things. And so, stop.
Just move in the mic.
So we found out that these late night soup kitchens were installed on the streets in Tokyo, and we thought that's an ideal place to make an interview that is integrated in something that is not that that transcends the situation of an interview, you know, because it's not the question of just talking, because this would have been an element in this narration that was clear from the beginning, that would have been strange and not really to be integrated. So by chance we found this place, and we thought this place is full with action, movement, and sounds. Breaking the bones, for example, no? Breaking bones, yeah, perfect, ideal for as background for an interview. And then we convinced Fred. We always had to convince him for these kind of ideas, but he accepted.
Well, it's
and
food.
We had enough sake,
food and drink,
and then we tried that.
No, I mean the point is that that's the only sequence where you are in the image.
Ah, where I am in the image. Yeah, yeah.
There's no filmmaker in there. There's no.
No, that's me. Just me.
Somebody must have been there to
Yeah.
film that and to record the song.
Yeah.
But you don't see it.
No.
And this is the scene
Mm-hmm.
where I see you.
Yeah.
And like I get the this for me it like
But
reflects on all the rest of the film.
yeah.
You're
The presence, you mean, the presence of a.
of you and that
Mhm.
makes the
But it could be also somebody else. Could be a film. Sometimes people think I'm René Lucier. No? Yeah. A little
Really?
Bit. Yeah. So
But you'll notice that in that scene, the microphone falls off, and as the sound designer, he of course is while talking putting the microphone back on so that I'll be audible. So he needed to be there because I kept losing the microphone.
that's it. Exactly. Only for that moment. Not for my questions. Yes, of course. But on one, I mean, the film is a film that contains very different styles also, and I like that. I mean, that makes the film also so vivid, and so that it's not that it's one form of only movements or only kind of images and sounds or images and music. No, it's these ruptures also and the breaks that makes it so alive, I think, and no hierarchy or no style that, yeah. And maybe, and that's an element, of course, that is different than the others.
also like you take the mic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not it's like you're there, you take the mic.
Yeah. In a normal way, we didn't stop. No, it was just continuing.
You would shout cops.
Yeah, right. Exactly. This doesn't work. You know, we have to restart everything. You know? No. It's just fluid. Yeah.
So
Innocence also. You know, I think it's a film made completely in the highest degree of innocence, and maybe that's the spirit of the film, and still to feel. So, thank you very much. No, or do you want to go on? I mean,
no, you.
Thank you very much.
11, you said 11.
Do you want? Well, I was actually about to finish. I wanted to say, since we've been.
Question.
Okay,
Questions.
then.
More questions.
Then one more question. Is that okay?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's allowed.
So I'm an old fan. I was there in some of the scene in the 80s. I want to ask you, how do you feel about that? Because in retrospect, we're like 35 years later. How do you feel about that period of your life? You're kind of nostalgic, or you think, for example, you're a much better musician now, or how do you evaluate that period?
35 years.
Yeah.
It was 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And even then, I found it extremely liberating in a very unexpected way. Because when I first saw the film, I was very disturbed by looking at myself and hearing myself talking, and I felt very self-conscious, both in the film and out of the film. And it's quite quickly shifted, and I realized it was a unique opportunity for me to shed a skin. And so what happened, in fact, is in a way, the film liberated me from that person in the film that you see, and I could become somebody else. somebody closer to what I was trying to be. It's always a bit difficult, you know. You keep trying, but you never quite get there. But I felt that was great, that I could, and now still looking at the screen, I see this person and I know that it's me and I know that I've come from that, but I'm no longer relating to it in any way at all. I found it fascinating that, yeah, okay, so that's what you thought, okay. So it was, I felt, the film changed my life in a lot of ways because it was a big success. So suddenly people would stop me in trains and, you know, it became a thing where you would be recognized, and that was disconcerting. Didn't last long, but for a short period. And mostly I felt like I was able to get on with things in a completely different way. And I'm grateful for that.
Well, that's wonderful to finish like this, maybe. I was just about to say the material is continuing to travel. There's the Cut Up the Border version, for example.
Cut Up the Border, yeah.
And you just were in Burghausen. And there's a kind of exhibition or installation with it, how I understood
Cut Up
it.
the Border, yeah. We did something. I mean, I brought 3 CDs because the story of Step Across the Border didn't end, you know. And we, how to describe that in few words, there were 100 tapes of original material recorded during the shooting of Step Across the Border that I kept always in a box and in our archive. And one day I got a phone call that the whole archive was flooded by an inundation. So disaster, you know. And the only thing more or less that I kept was this box filled up with water and these 100 tapes. And then I dried them a summer long in the sun, laying in the meadow. And a year later, I had this box again in my hands, and I said, okay, now I have to decide. Either I throw it away into the next container, this 100 tapes, or I make something out of it, because it's rich. It was rich because only a very short, very few excerpts of the material were used for the film, and there were many other recordings, very interesting recordings. The same night, I wrote an email to Bavarian Radio and Deutschlandfunk, whether they are interested in a composition, a recomposition, a new composition out of these these not used tapes, and they answered right away, yes, they want to make it, you know. I didn't control the tapes until now. I offered it, but as a project, but I didn't test whether the inundation and the flooded tapes were already, if there is already. So the next step I had to...
Talking of innocence, yeah.
Talking about innocence, yeah. So I prepared the old Nagra recorder, put in the first tape, and miracle, all the sounds were there. That's not thinkable with the digital material, but old analog material, everything was there. So I invited a close friend from Marseille, Marc Parisotto, a sound designer, to compose a new piece out of this material, and this became Cut Up the Border. And it was broadcasted by Deutschlandradio and Bavarian Radio. And we were invited to a live performance for the opening of this project to Babylon in Berlin. Fred was playing. Fred came in then at the end in the studio and added a new soundtrack, it was a beautiful day in the studio again with Fred. So I was very happy also that this collaboration continued in a very concrete way. And I think the result is...
one of the hardest gigs. We did 2 live gigs of this, and you and Mark had this table full of,
mixing.
And I was supposed to improvise, and there's bombarding me with all kinds of stuff. I had no idea what was coming, and it was quite challenging.
Yeah,
but fun.
Yeah, yeah. So that's Right, and I have 3 copies. So if somebody is interested, it is published at a very beautiful label in Paris.
It's 500 euros each.
Yeah, of course, minimum. So we can negotiate. So this was just an idea to bring them along. So step across the border, cut up the borders. The story continues. It was a beautiful evening here together with you.
I'm really grateful that it was possible to show the film and that you came for the invitation. It was really enriching talk. Thank you for coming and see you next time. Fred Frith, Nicolas Humbert.